How's it, guys? Today we are going to be defining the surf zone for you. And yeah, super important to just understand this definition and terminology used. It's going to build a solid foundation from which to build all your awareness and knowledge of the surf zone moving forward on top of. So let's jump straight into it, guys. Okay, so the surf zone is simply defined as the area where waves break and where rip currents flow. I'll repeat that. That's the area where waves break and rip currents flow. So you can see I've bordered the surf zone in this dark blue pen over here. And you can clearly see it's extending from the shore a little bit beyond backline. And yeah, you can see it really. It's the area where we tend to play in the water, where we tend to surf, where we tend to swim. And so it's quite important to actually familiarize with yourself with this zone and understand its movements. And so that's what the goal of these analysis videos is going to be for you guys. All right, but before we move into any further definitions of the zone, let's just talk about water real quick, because we are dealing with vast amount of water when in the ocean, and water has certain characteristics and behaves in certain ways, and understanding this kind of makes it a little bit easier in understanding why the surf zone moves the way it does. Okay, so basically water will move into the shore with waves, all right, causing a buildup or an accumulation of water at the shoreline. This accumulation of water is out of equilibrium. Now, as we know, water always seeks its equilibrium, or will always flow until it's at an equal level. Okay, so this buildup of water at the shoreline naturally wants to return back out to sea. Okay, and it does so in rip currents. And so what we have going on in the surf zone, in the most simplest understanding, is that water is moving in with waves, collecting at the shore. This collection is out of equilibrium, and you've got water then moving back out to sea in rip currents, seeking its equilibrium. Okay, and now that we have that in mind, we can start to move forward and really understand the surf zone. Okay, it's important to be aware of what I'm about to tell you guys here. So, as you have water pulling into your beaches with the waves, all right, oftentimes these waves or the flow of water will encounter obstructions, and these obstructions obstruct the flow of water or influence the way the water flows, all right? And these obstructions can be rocks, like in the video below, or if you're at a beach in another part of the world, the structures that you are aware of could be piers, could be rivers, could be rips, could be headlands, could be any other man-made structures that are sort of sticking out beyond the mid-break to backlines, and really influencing or obstructing the flow of water. Okay, and so it's important to be able to be aware of these structures. These structures are fundamental in the surf zone. A lot of things occur around them, and they are areas of caution and also areas of importance. All right, and so moving forward, when we're looking at the surf zone, we can start zooming in and actually identifying unique zones within the surf zone. And these unique zones are bordered by these structures that sort of stick at least halfway out or all the way out to backline. And you can see that I have identified 4 unique zones here, bordered by those rock structures that I previously highlighted. And all these zones fall within the surf zone. However, they are unique in the sense that when studying each individual zone, you may notice that the water is moving differently in the zone that's next to it. All right, and this is true for every single zone. No zone is going to be the same. The ocean is a very different, variable and changing place, and so are these zones. Okay, and so it's important to be able to recognize this and understand that as you move from maybe one zone to the next, say the purple to the yellow, that the water may be moving differently, even if it's within the same hour or same day. Okay, and so here's an example of water moving differently in two zones that are right next to each other, okay? On the top, we have an orange circle highlighting a rip current that is in the right-hand side of that little beach, which is in fact the bathing or main swimming beach of Belito, called Bathers. And on the bottom, we have this orange circle highlighting a rip that is on the left-hand side of this beach. And so here we have a situation where we have two unique zones right next to each other, and we have rip currents on opposite ends of the beaches, okay? So if you had to move from Bathers to the beach next to it, you might just find that water is being pulled along that beach differently. You might be being pulled around differently. And so it's important to be aware of this and to understand that this is the ocean, guys. It's constantly changing. And this is really why it's important to understand it and be able to read it, because once it becomes like muscle memory or second nature, then you just start feeling it. You're just in tune with the water, guys, in tune with its flow, and your confidence will increase and your experience down at the beaches will increase. Okay, so moving forward, we should also just explain to you guys that we can break the surf zone down into different sectors, okay? You can break each unique zone down into different sectors, or you can look at the entire surf zone as a whole, as in our first slide, and break that down into these three sectors. Okay, these three sectors will remain the same for all unique zones or for all surf zones. First, you will have shore break, all right? This is first because I suppose if you're on the beach entering the water, this is the first sector you would encounter upon entering the water, okay? So you have the shore break. This is simply where the waves are meeting the sand, breaking onto the shore for the final time before the water slowly returns back out to sea in rip current. Okay, moving past that, we've got the mid break. This is simply the area in between the shore break and the back line, all right? Hence the name, mid break. And then that's the purple box, and in the blue box right at the back we have the back line. Now, it is important to be aware that this is not one fixed line. As you can see, I've drawn a box that covers quite a distance, and that is what backline is, guys. Backline constantly shifts and moves with the tides and also with set waves, all right? And so you may get smaller waves breaking closer to the mid break, and then you may have bigger waves or bigger set waves breaking real far out, say 50 to maybe in some places 100 meters further out than the smaller waves. And so backline is going to cover that entire distance, all right? So backline is also an area or a sector within the zone. If you were a surfer, you'd be sitting out at backline waiting to catch waves. And if you're a swimmer wanting to swim past the waves to enjoy a little bit of peace and calm ocean, you'd most likely be swimming out beyond backline. Okay, guys, and that's us having covered the surf zone. I think it'll be important to just do a little recap. So we look at the surf zone as a whole. It's defined as the area where waves break and rips flow. Okay, cool. Remember, water is what we're dealing with in the ocean, and the characteristics of water, that it continuously flows, naturally seeking an equal level. As it flows into our beaches and bays, often water will encounter obstructions, and these obstructions obstruct the flow of water. These obstructions also allow us to identify unique zones and zoom into the surf zone and study how water is flowing differently within these unique zones that are right next to each other. And that was the example I gave. And lastly, it's important to be aware of these three sectors: shore break, mid break, and backline. And that's simply covering the surf zone, guys. Now remember, the surf zone is one unit. It is one big system, and it is constantly moving, constantly shifting, constantly changing, constantly being influenced by many variable elements of nature. And as discussed and highlighted in our course, those variable elements are wind, swell, waves, rips, and tides. One that we haven't mentioned too much is sand, but that's purely because sand is also a variable element. However, it is a much more complex topic to understand. And so we will leave that for a later stage once you guys' knowledge and awareness in the surf zone and the ocean in general has been taken up a level. But very basically, sand is always moving around with the water, and so sand will be pulled away from certain areas and deposited in other areas with different surf zone conditions, okay? And this comes down to your tides, your swell, your winds, your rips, your waves. All these elements actually affect the sand, all right? Okay, so let's do a little recap on our 5 variable elements real quick. Just looking at this still shot, let's see what we can identify, what we can learn, or what we can understand of each of these 5 variable elements. All right, so let's start with wind. What can we say about wind? Well, it looks pretty calm. The ocean looks pretty smooth. It's not rough, it's not choppy. We don't see white horses. But I'll tell you right now that the wind is blowing. If you guys haven't noticed already, here we have a wave breaking, and you can clearly see that the spray of the wave has been blown behind the wave. All right, this is an indication of offshore winds. What do we know about offshore winds? Well, offshore winds are favorable winds, especially if you're surfing, but even if you're just interested in spending time down at the beach, it creates cleaner, groomed conditions, all right? So the waves are going to be nicer to surf, the ocean's going to be smoother and more enjoyable to swim in. It's going to be better for paddling, it's going to be better for boating, for fishing. You know, this is a favorable wind offshore. So if you're experiencing offshores, be excited about it. Okay, what can we say about the swell? Well, looking at these swell lines here, you can see that they are very defined swell lines, you know, extending way out to sea. All right, and this is a clear indication of ground swell, guys. Also, the fact that the swell period, or the distance between each swell lines, is significant. All right, clear indication of ground swell. Ground swells hold a lot more energy and are a lot more powerful and are moving a lot more water. So this is exactly what we're seeing here, and this translates into the surf zone. The swell size is very important, guys, because that will affect the waves and the rips as we move on to them. So what can we say about waves today? Well, I'll tell you straight off the bat, today Belito was firing, the waves were amazing, surfers were out there loving it, catching all-time waves, and yeah, that's just thanks to a good swell pulling through, and particularly being a ground swell combined with offshore winds. Waves were really good, okay? But it's important to note that you got bigger swells, more powerful swells. That means you got bigger waves, more powerful waves, pushing a lot more water into the beaches, okay? Just on a quick note here, you see this white water? That pretty much extends across the entire beach. All right, that's an indication of a lot of water moving and power. And so if you were a surfer or a bodyboarder trying to paddle out to the backline, you would definitely have a tough time paddling at this beach where I've highlighted this white water in purple, because as you can see, the white water is extending across the entire bay, and so you are going to have to do a lot of work to punch through all this white water. You know, of course, you'd be looking for your rip currents, which in this beach is right here. Okay, so you would most likely try paddle out there, especially if you're trying to surf over there. Okay, but just bear in mind the signs that white water gives you. White water, like waves, like anything in the ocean really, it gives you signs, it tells you things about what's happening. Okay, rip currents today are going to be very powerful. You can see, like I highlighted before, there's one. All right, and yeah, they're going to be powerful. You can expect them to be moving a lot more water around, and I would stress more caution on beaches on days like this if your confidence in the water is not really up there, because now we're understanding that we've got bigger swell, bigger waves, stronger rip currents. And so safety always comes first, guys. And lastly, about tides. What can we say about tides? Well, for tides, I'd like you guys to have a look here at the sand, all right? And what can we tell? What can we tell about the tides on the sand? Well, you can see here, we've got that line. That's the high water line, or the high tide mark, okay? And clearly, the water isn't currently reaching that level. Water is currently reaching that level as the waves are breaking for the last time on the shore break. And so we can quickly draw the conclusion that the tide has dropped from its highest point, all right? You may not be able to tell if it's completely low tide. I do know at the time of recording this video that the tide was almost low tide. And so very shortly after this, we could expect the tide to turn, and we could expect that this current water line, which I've highlighted in blue, would start moving higher up the beach towards that green line, where it would eventually reach the green line back at high tide. Okay, so if you came to visit this beach a couple hours later in the day, you can expect the water to be pushing up all the way there. All right, and that's just something to be aware of. So yeah, that was a quick recap of all the variable elements that we encounter in our surf zone, and just a little look at what we can see from that still shot. Guys, I appreciate your time. I think that's a great place to end this video. We have a brief understanding of the definition of the surf zone and what we're going to be looking at moving forward. And just always bear in mind that we are always analyzing and determining which way the water is flowing. And to do that, we are taking into account all the variable elements, and we are really looking at the surf zone and this unique and complex and dynamic moving system. Cool.